How does a young woman leader become dexterous and multifaceted without losing her sense of self?
I am either blessed or cursed by the idea that I think I can do everything. I try everything one time at least.
She is a writer, an archivist, a restorer of memory and public libraries. She doesn't just tell stories, she protects where they are stored.
Book Bunk is a non-profit organization based here in Nairobi that exists solely to transform public libraries.
Wanjiru Koinange opens up about grief, family, and purpose.
When you walk into a room, there's so many people who you're walking in with.
From managing artists in Kenya's music scene to building a culture of reading and reflection, Wanjiru reminds us that leadership is also about listening to the silences.
I did end up listening to that inner voice and allowing it to steer me towards creativity.
In addition to today's conversation, we will be hosting a special Power Panel bookshelf episode dedicated to her novel, The Havoc of Choice.
We have been stripped of the thing that gives Kenyans voice, and we've been stripped of it by the lack of care that was taken around '07. And that's why I wrote that book.
Join us for a conversation about memory, power, women, and patriotism.
Oh my goodness, I'm really enjoying these questions.
Welcome to the Power Panel Podcast Echoes, a segment of our show dedicated to exciting intergenerational conversations with some of Africa's young, dynamic women leaders. I am your host, Ambassador Raychelle Omamo, a senior counsel, diplomat, and former cabinet minister in Kenya. Welcome to the Power Panel podcast. It really is a delight to have you. You're one of those inspiring young African leaders that I've been reading about. And so I'm really keen on having this conversation with you. Now, as I've been doing some research about you, this word multifaceted keeps coming up. And it occurs to me that younger leaders like yourself are many things in one. You know, in our day, you are an advocate and that's it, or you are an accountant and that's it. But you're a novelist, you're a journalist, you're a restorer, you're an archivist, you're an opinion shaper. You're so many things, tied up into one, but yet you're not in chaos, you're not rudderless. You still seem to be able to manage this versatility and agility. And so I want to find out how you do that before we even start this conversation. Where does that capacity to be versatile, to be agile, to be fluid in this world come from?
That is such an honor, by the way. I don't think I've ever thought of myself as multifaceted, but you're right. I do like to keep busy. I am either blessed or cursed by the idea that I think I can do everything. And I will at least try and fail, but I will always try. I try everything one time at least. So I think that it comes from my innate sense of curiosity. When I'm curious about something, the best way for me to learn is to delve myself into it. It also means that I'm often juggling a lot, and doing so as a writer when I need a lot of time to be solitude and still and to reflect. I've learned that that's important, but the balance between the solitude and the slowness and the quick pace of doing everything or trying to do everything is really important. It keeps me sharp. I think it's a byproduct of being born and raised in Nairobi. I think Nairobi is a city that kind of forces you to do as much as you can to stay sharp. I can't describe it any other way than just staying sharp. So I think it's my curiosity and the idea that I can do everything I want to actually, which ask me in 10 years, we'll see how that's going.
All right. So it's this drive to use all of yourself.
Yeah, and use all of myself while I have the energy, while I have the inspiration to do so. I do believe that youth comes with vitality and energy, and I think it's best to use it when you have it because especially when you're advocating for something to change. I've watched and studied so many powerful leaders just slow down, and it's important to slow down. But if you haven't had a moment of kind of ramping up and going when you were younger and more energetic, then I think there's a bit of a loss there. So I want to do as much as I can while I have the energy, the will, and the desire to, because I don't take for granted that I'll always have those things.
All right. Um, just expanding on this idea of versatility, idea of this idea of daring, this idea of using yourself to your fullest potential. I want to go back to when you left USIU and delved into the music industry. And from what I've read, you started to manage artists and events. What drew you there? What was the pathway to the music?
Wow, that's such a throwback. So I was in USIU in around 2008 for my undergrad, maybe no 2005, and my really good friend called Rachel Gishinga was interning for Eric Wainaina, and I was probably 18 or just turned 19 at the time, and his office was right next to USIU in Kasarani. So it was a thing to do in the time between my classes. I'm like, I like Eric. I've grown up listening to him. I think that the idea of social change that he peppers his music with is really powerful. And I just had time. I had just returned home from the US after trying to go to university in the US and not liking it at all. I didn't like how alone I felt, and I got the sense that if I did my undergrad in Ohio, I would come back American, and there's nothing, I didn't want to come back American. I wanted to remain as Kenyan as I could. So I came home and I was ready to connect with as much as I could around Nairobi. So this job opportunity to intern for Eric, when Rachel mentioned it to me, I was like, absolutely. And that's where it began. I worked for Eric for about 6 years, so all through my undergrad and for 2 years afterwards. Juggled the work because obviously, as I continued to work for him, I did a lot more than intern. At some point, I was running events for him, running his publicity, being a tour manager. I did everything I could over those 6 years. But that's truly where the idea that I could use my creativity to change something was born. And that's why I saw it practically working with Eric and his incredible team. And I think a lot of the things that I do today were inspired by that first job. And I'm always very grateful to both Eric and Shiba Hurst for the exposure that they gave this 19-year-old who had just had free time, really.
What's the key skill you learned?
Project management. Absolutely
Okay.
project management. Yeah, because working for an artist means you've got to do everything. And that's become one of my superpowers today. And I think that's probably why I think I can do everything, because everything is really a project, right? And if you're organized and you think high level, but also think about the details, then you're unstoppable. But I think I learned how to manage projects and all of the different stakeholders, from funders to the sound guys, which when you're working for a performer is the most important piece of the puzzle. A large reason why I went on to work for a sound company was because of watching not just Eric, but so many local live music musicians spend days and hours rehearsing for performances, and then they come to a show and the sound is terrible, and all of that work goes down the drain. And that was very heartbreaking. And that also inspired me to now work for a sound business so I can understand, like, where is the disconnect happening. But to answer your question, I really learned how to look at a project and identify all of the stakeholders and figure out how to manage everything about that project.
So, very early in your career, you began to understand your calling in this area of creativity and culture, and also to understand that you had an exceptional skill. But you took that to creative writing. You then went to the University of Cape Town and started to ponder about writing, and therefore going back to what took you to university in the first place. Tell me about that drive, that passion to write. Because
Mm.
writing is a very powerful tool. It's the way in which you use language to to place people in events, to place people to take people to places they don't want to go, or where they want to go, to influence thinking, to influence discourse. It's a very powerful tool. So, as you delved into creative writing, what did that connect with in your past? And how did it begin to tell you that this was your future?
So the inclination to write was always in me. I've always somehow known I was a writer. I know I could manipulate words well. It showed up in my scores in primary and secondary school. I was always top of the class in English, composition, and literature. So I always knew I had a way with words. I was also raised by a woman, by my mother, who encouraged us to read as much as we could. So I have very many memories lying down at St. George's Primary School on the whole library floor, just buried in a book. And then, and all through my career working in the entertainment industry, I was always writing small articles here, reflections there. I had a blog at some point. And then my father passed away in 2009, and I am a daddy's girl. I love both my parents dearly, but I am a daddy's girl, and his passing completely shattered my life, and I couldn't stand to be in Nairobi anymore without knowing how to be my dad's daughter. And I come from a very big and very close family, and we're all really grappling with his loss in different ways. But the thing that his loss also gifted me was an inheritance, a bit of money to go and do something new, to escape really. And my father is the one person who always told me, this gig thing you're doing is nice. These events are fun. I can see you're enjoying them. You're in your 20s, you're out all the time, you're having a good time, getting good at it. But he told me, Wanjiru, you're a writer. You're a writer. You should write more. You should write more. You should write more. So when he passed away, I took his advice, and I used my inheritance to sign up for grad school and go to UCT and write about him. I thought the best way for me to grieve my father was to write his memoirs. I now know it was too soon to do that, so I didn't end up writing about him, but I did end up writing. I did end up listening to that inner voice and allowing it to steer me towards creativity. And I loved those years spent in Cape Town just being a writer. I had other jobs, but writing was what I would wake up and go to an office to do from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then I would hustle and do whatever else I needed to. But I do think that while I've always had the calling for creativity, I knew I couldn't sing, I knew I couldn't paint. I've tried them all, tried dancing as well. But writing is just what came naturally. And I think the crisis of my father's passing allowed me to tap into it. And I'm always very grateful that I was able to use that crisis in that way.
Okay, now, one of the things you wrote was this lovely book, which I want everyone to see, The Havoc of Choice, a bestseller. And it's a book that is based around the 2007 post election violence. This is a book that is about choices and the consequence of choices and how you can't control all the variables. In your life, what choice have you made that you have not been able to control, and what lessons have you learned from that?
Oh my goodness, I'm really enjoying these questions. I think that a choice that I cannot control anymore is a choice to start Book Bunk, to focus this season of my career on public libraries and rejuvenating them. And I say I can't control it because that's a cause that has become bigger than me. Book Bunk began just about, we were obsessed with the Macmillan. We wanted to restore this beautiful big building in the center of the city, but it has now evolved to truly show us the power of community spaces. We've restored two libraries in Kaleni and Makadara, and those spaces are magical. They are serving community members in ways that I never thought a library could. And last year, we were, as many organizations our age or our many nonprofits were going through a really difficult time of funding and trying to figure out how can we make this work sustainable. And we made it through a really tough season. And I know a lot of people are going through that now, but that we survived it against even my judgment and my I didn't see how we were gonna survive. It made me really clear that the work we're doing is not about me anymore. It's about the people that we serve. There's forces in there that are just making sure that we'll be okay. And for that reason, I don't really lose sleep around the direction that this organization is going, because it's being led by need. It's being led by the things that we're hearing by the 60,000 people who came into our libraries last year and told us, hey, we're really struggling with understanding the finance bill. Could we get someone to come and explain it to us? Is there a way you can get somebody to come and help us understand what we should be looking for in leaders? That is such power. And that's not what I hoped we'd be doing when we set up Book Bunk. I thought we'd do Macmillan, get it nice and beautiful, and then go on to write other books. But Book Bunk has taken a life of its own. I've learned to sit back and let it go where it needs to go and steer the ship when it needs my leadership. But um, I know that that decision has now grown into something much bigger than me, and I don't hate that. Actually, I really love it.
Now, I want you to take us back so that we have a really strong understanding of what Book Bank is. What is Book Bank in a nutshell? And what inspired that choice? That choice that you say has been so life-changing and so directed towards the transformation of community.
So, Book Bank is a nonprofit organization based here in Nairobi that exists solely to transform public libraries. The kind of flagship project and the reason why we set up Book Bank is my co-founder Angela Washuka and I, in our previous lives, I was an event manager, she was running a publishing house, and we walked into the Macmillan. We wanted it to be the house for an event we were having. It didn't look the way we needed it to. And that was kind of the seed. That was the beginning of the questions around public space, around literary spaces. Whose job is it to care for them? And what am I doing and saying if I plan to spend my life writing for writing books, for my books to end up abandoned in dusty old buildings that nobody's really using? And that was the kind of questions that led to the formation of Book Bank. We thought we would just start with the Macmillan. We thought we would just donate some books and move on. But the call was really strong. One that I don't think I fully understood it to date, but we have committed the last 8 years of our lives to truly listening to community. We adopt these spaces that are all kind of in the ownership of Nairobi County government, and we get into 5-on-5 year agreements where we tell them for the next 5 years we're going to show you what these spaces can do. We fundraise for the work, and once we do the physical restoration, which is informed by a lot of community engagement, we then plug in all the programs that can truly help Kenyans solve their own problems. So if someone wants to know how to vote better, we will bring in civic educators to show them what the landscape of elections look like. If you want to understand what the criminal justice system looks like, then we bring in experts who can do that. If you want to learn how to play the guitar or learn how to speak your local language, it's really something for everyone. And now after 8 years of doing this, we're really thinking about what scale looks like. What does it mean to have vibrant, active, responsive libraries in every part of Kenya? And what kind of change can that begin to ignite when you give people all the tools they need to improve their livelihoods? Um, and now we're trying to raise a lot of money to restore the Macmillan.
What I understand you to be saying is that for you, a public library is like a public square where people come to exchange ideas, to learn. It's a place of memory and it's also a place where you imagine the future. Do I understand you to be saying that?
Absolutely, absolutely. The idea of a library is I love the public square because that triggers also the idea of an African library where we would gather and we would listen to elders tell us about the past, about the present, because elders are the libraries of the African of Africa, and that's one of the things that we're really trying to inject into these spaces. It's okay to prioritize books. Books are wonderful. I love them. I want to write them. But stories in the context of Africans and Kenyans, they live in so many other places. So we have audio projects where we go into people's homes and record stories from their parents. Tell me where you are in 1963, and I'll record that story because it's just as important as the one that was written down. And once you have the content, how can we gather around these stories? How can we have fireside chats, public squares? Absolutely. And because we're running libraries in this city, in Eastland specifically, where there's such a large number of underserved communities, then we add the extra layer of teaching something, giving people actionable skills. Yeah, it's a marriage between a public square and a solution center.
Okay, so do you consider it's a manifestation or um a component of social justice?
I think so. I think so. And it's one thing that I began to think about and reflect on a lot for myself in the season of protests here in Kenya. What we're doing with libraries is revolutionary. It's very simple, but and that's probably why it's so revolutionary, because it can be done anywhere. But yeah, you're connecting people to knowledge, to their sense of knowledge. But when you have knowledge, then you can make your own decisions. They can be informed. And I think that absolutely is a form of social justice, and one that we're finding is really beginning to shift the way our library users are approaching their livelihoods.
Now, you've restored two libraries, and you're in the process of restoring Kenya's largest library, I guess, the Macmillan Memorial Library. Now, I want to understand from you the skill that goes around convincing people, whether it's county governments, whether it's donors, whether it's local communities, about the value of culture and memory and why it's important to invest in it. I mean, you're not talking to people about building public toilets. People understand that. You're not talking to them about bringing access, giving them access to water. You're not talking about improving the bus system. You're talking about something that's fairly intangible. So your powers of persuasion must be very good. Your tactics must be sharp. What is it that you're doing or that you have done with your co founder to attract this much attention, this much participation, this much funding to intangible wealth, intangible power?
Yeah, it's very much a result of the cultural space being the only one that we both know. I have spent my entire life working in some kind of creative space, and the same is true for Angela, who was a publisher before this work. It's not easy. I keep saying raising money for culture is the hardest thing in the world, and in this season at Book Bunk, we're also trying to figure out what other things can we anchor our work on, because we're learning that the cultural lens is not sustainable. It's powerful, it's necessary, but for all the things you've just mentioned, it will always take a second step after food and education and infrastructure and hospital, especially in this country. The journey to getting, at the time, it was Governor Kidero to agree to this project, was 2 years and 18 months of us peddling those contracts like they were groundnuts on the street. We would walk around with paperwork in our handbags every day, just in case we get the call to go and sign with the governor. Because while they didn't necessarily see the value of culture, they understood the value of the libraries and what it can do for education, for things that are a lot more mainstream. And that's often what we lead with. And what we're doing a lot more now at a strategic level at Book Bunk, because we want to be here for as long as libraries are needed. But culture money is drying up. The value of culture will always be one that we're almost having to, it's almost very niche. But I think when you speak to Kenyan parents, when you speak to any African parents, the thing that they want for their kids is a connection to their roots. They want them to speak their local languages. I read Kikuyu, I understand Kikuyu, but I don't speak it because I'm raised in Nairobi, where we don't really do that. What about if the library could do that? How do we begin to shift when you show up and you think in your mother tongue first and then in English? How do we begin to then remember who we are as Kenyans? Because I think the effect of our past has meant that all of these things have been erased, and we now adopt English. We assume English is our most popular tongue, even if it's, I think, maybe the 11th most popular language in Kenya, spoken, actively used. So it's really about all of the ways that we can begin to touch our identity through these libraries. But in this season, we're trying to trick people a lot more and be like, yes, we're peddling education. Then once we have the education money, we can pepper in some cultural education as well, because all these things are important. It's also around really meeting people where they're at. With the county, when we're negotiating with them, we knew that they hadn't been able to allocate proper resources to the building over the last 90 years. So we didn't ask for that. We asked for permission to create a blueprint for what Kenyan libraries could be. And that's an easier thing to get consent for when you're not actually asking for hard cash. We will ask for money eventually. But once we have really proven and shown, we have years of track record of what impact across the cultural, I mean, beyond the cultural space, these libraries can have, and we're already beginning to see that. We're already beginning to see what happens when people come to the library to be connected to jobs. Then they have additional income or disposable income that they can then spend on culture, and then we're then beginning to have a more holistic conversation about the value of culture from a economic perspective as well.
What is the challenge to libraries from social media? A lot of our young people, I guess your target group would be young people, are, obsessed with social media. Um, they spend a lot of time harvesting information from outside our borders, information that is contrary, actually, to many of our cultural values. You have this countervailing force that is increasingly crushing um, the framework of our cultural identity. Now, I'm wondering how this idea of yours of libraries, whether they're physical or virtual, because I know with the climate change library, it's a digital library. How do you think you'll be able to stand up to that onslaught?
I don't think we need to. I think that there's lots of people who come to the libraries to get away from their screens. A big reason why we adopted Kaloleni and Makadara libraries, or what now we call it the Eastlands Library, is because they already had a healthy stream of young people using them before any of our interventions. I think we have been made to believe that tech has replaced the tangible, the physical, but that's not true. Our most consistently requested items are, yes, Wi-Fi, but then it's the physical books. So I think that there's been definitely a season, and maybe more so for millennials, when we prioritize the screen over everything else. But what we're seeing from younger people in Eastlands is that they are very happy to be offline, playing games and communing with each other, which they can't do elsewhere. And I don't think it has to be an either or. I don't think there's any competition. The readership of physical books is higher now than it has been in the last 2 decades, because we are turning to other ways to get information that are not the screen. So I think it's about creating spaces for both of those to happen. And that's what we do really well in the libraries. We have lots of screens. We don't block the internet from accessing any social media sites, because that's where information lies. What we also began to do is highlight places where people can get content that relates to their culture a bit more. And TikTok is great for that. I'm so happy to see all of the creators who are creating in vernacular, or just trying to create this bridge between what is out there and what exists as a reality for us. And the final thing is that we're very intentional about centering African in our collections, in our programming. So when we're building collections for a library, yes, we will have the classic that everybody wants that are available all over the world, but we will spend actual time and money on African writers, because that is what you can't find anywhere else. Our goal is that if you want to walk into a library that is a library of African thought and fiction and ideas, that our libraries can give you that, because you can go everywhere else for anything else. And I think that's how we're trying to center ourselves. In our programming, we will teach music, but it's not the orchestra. And if we do teach orchestral instruments, then you're adding your TTs and you're adding congas and things that also speak to who we are, and do so in a way that kind of strives towards some kind of balance.
As we take this short power break, we ask that you subscribe to the Power Panel podcast. Let's work together to expand the Power Panel community. Visit our website, birdsongafrica.com, and follow us on social media to plug into the Power Panel network. Email your thoughts to hello@birdsongafrica.com. As we reflect on the themes in Wanjiru's book, The Havoc of Choice, it is clear that the novel holds a profound space in our national consciousness. To explore this further, we'll be releasing a special Power Panel Bookshelf episode dedicated to it and diving deeper into the characters, the context, and the choices that continue to shape our understanding of who we are as Africans. Be sure to look out for it on Spotify and YouTube. This is the Power Panel Podcast, Echoes. In this work around the advancement of, I guess, culture, do you encounter patriarchy?
Yeah,
What kind?
absolutely. I think it comes when you're in rooms, um, and I think maybe often it's when interacting with governmental spaces that are not necessarily traditionally um, sent or kind of cordoned off for women to participate in. But there's really a lot of like, how do I say this without saying it? You really have to like do the naive young female thing a lot, just so that people can almost write you off, or you can do what you want to at some point. It definitely isn't as rampant as it would be if I was actually, for instance, running for office, because the culture space is one where, again, there's lots of women running things. But there's definitely, when you have to be in those rooms where decisions are made, I often have to decide what mask I'm wearing that day. And I have a brilliant friend called June Gashri who has taught me how to do this so well. Because June she's a lawyer, she's doing all of these incredible things. But she tells me sometimes, you walk into a room and the average age is 65, and you know these are the guys who are gonna get you the work, and you have to just remember how you show up for your grandfather, and you bow when you do the thing, even if you're the most qualified person in the room, because that's the context we're working in. And you'd rather do that and open up that door for the woman coming behind you than to sit there and be like, I'm not gonna show respect, and then we all end up losing. So I've learned from June and from my other bigger sisters how to do that dance, and to really see people not for what they're saying, but for where it's coming from, right? Everybody's conditioned. I really love to make change, but I'm also learning what kind of structural battles I want to fight, and which ones I want to open the door for others to come and fight with me or come and fight after me. And the patriarchy is one that I will fight forever, but I will do so with tact. I'll know when to humble myself, but I also know when to channel my mother and be fierce and and not take any nonsense. It's a dance. I think it's a big part of being a woman.
Okay, I want you to listen to Dr. Wanjiru Kamar Rutenberg on this subject.
I then leveraged my disadvantage as a young African woman in that room into a power of conversation and invitation. I think the experience of patriarchy forces women to have to develop different tools than men in leadership.
I think both those statements by her are so true. They connect so much with what you've just said. This idea that you have to use different tools to enter into rooms, different tools to initiate conversation, and you're doing that to confront patriarchy. Who are you teaching these skills to?
Yeah, that's a question I may have to reflect a little bit on after this call, because it's a great one. I don't have any children, but I'm an auntie to 11 nieces and nephews. I lead a team of incredible women, all who are just kind of at the cusp of 30. Um, and I nothing brings me more joy than to speak to women younger than me who just have passion and drive for things. And I don't know if I'm actively like teaching people or teaching younger women these skills more than just by doing it by example. I have women on my team who can negotiate better than I can. There are days, and I say this with a lot of salt, but there are days when I go to the Eastlands Library, and if the guard has changed, they'll be like, "Who are you? We don't know who you are." I'm like, "I'm the founder of Book Bunk," but they're like, "Oh, we know Marianne, or we know Lydia," who are team members of mine, who have been able to navigate that space so much more eloquently than I can. And I think that's a factor of also maybe how I have coach them into leadership, because I always say to lead with dignity. Doesn't matter if you're dealing with a drunkard trying to get into the library or somebody who has millions of dollars. You've got to treat everybody the same way. And I think that when you lead with respect, then people, I guess, are um, a lot more trusting of you. But I don't know if I'm running a kind of like Smash the Patriarchy 101 class, but I want to, a masterclass on how to just understand how to read a room and be soft. And I said earlier that I'm a last born in a big family. So I've always known my place. I've not always liked it, but I've always been very clear what my place is when I walk into a room. And then I adjust accordingly. And these are the tools that I think are being mentioned in that wonderful, the other Wanjiru's voice clip, that I've learned when to whisper to my friend Gati and be like, I will say this, or when to say it myself. So yeah, a new tool I'm gonna claim onto my belt, and maybe I will fashion a bit of a masterclass around it. Thank you for that great idea.
Okay. So you're pioneering something, breaking new ground, going to places where no one has ever been with this idea of restoring libraries and creating, you know, places of conversation um, in these libraries. And in leading in this way, what have you found you're not good at?
Oh, I am not good um at letting go, and I'm doing so now because I have to. So I recently came across a prompt on chat on Instagram that said, put this prompt into ChatGPT and let's see what comes up. And the prompt, because we use ChatGPT a lot, or AI, for a lot of things, research, grant writing, whatever. So it knows a lot about Book Bank and the work that we do. And I put this prompt in, and asked it to tell me. The prompt read, "Given everything you know about me and my work, show me some of my blind spots." And it really did. And obviously, what does this thing know about me? Right? I don't use it that much, but I use it a lot. And I think one of the blind spots that it showed me is that because Book Bank is a vision that we have held so closely, both Ashoka and I, for so long, in this season of letting go, you're gonna let go of something, but also just really touch it and be like, oh, but let me know if, but once this point has happened, and not really fully letting my team run with things and add their own texture to things. It's something I'm gonna have to learn. But I also don't know when not to pick a project up. I'm so interested by so many things. So and I still actively get a lot of work coming through my desk, if it's research or journalism work. I work on Book Bank full time now, but I still sometimes can't say no to other work because it keeps my curiosity going, and that means I'm often burnt out. But I'm really learning how to not always be led by my insane work ethic, and to just begin to remember who I am outside of my work, because there's a lot more to me. You wouldn't tell witnessing my work, my life, that there's a lot more to me, but there is a lot more to me than my work, and I'm trying to remember what that is.
You seem to value one thing quite quite prominently, and that is family. You've been talking a lot, you always go back to your family. You're the last child, you're this. Tell me, what kind of a family did you grow up in? And do you think that the work you're doing honors them, pleases them, um, elevates them? You know, in Africa, our families are so important. And when we walk into rooms, we don't just walk into rooms as ourselves, as individuals. We carry on our backs our relatives and friends and the clan. So I wanted to find out about your family and how you feel this work elevates them.
Thank you for that question. I love my family. They are the most important thing to me. And I think that's not just true for me. I think it's true for very many Kenyans. I think it's another reason why I frame the havoc of stress around the family, because we can disagree about many things. But when it comes to the family, we're all on the same page about its importance, both your given and your chosen families. So I grew up in a big family of five. Five children, so we're seven in total. I am the last. I have three sisters and one brother, and my brother is smack in the middle. So he and I often argue that he is a true last born, being the only boy, and he's truly our prince. Very, very close. My mother ran things at home. She was the head of the home. She was the one making sure that things were running, and my dad was a bit of our emotional center. And I think, and then we also grew up, I grew up on a farm on the outskirts of Nairobi, not very close to Ruaka, what is now Ruaka. So I grew up on a farm, and we didn't really have any neighbors. So my family were my first social circle. If you wanted neighbors, you would have to walk 2 kilometers, and that would be to your cousins or to somebody else. So I discovered that people made friends in school. Like I was like, people have friends who are like not or rather, I discovered people made friends outside of school much later in life, because all of my friends were either from school or they were my siblings. I know the work that I do honors them. I think that I have heard this not from my direct siblings, but from my aunts and uncles who had interactions with my grandfather. I've been told that the passion I have for this work, it reminds them of my grandfather, who I never met. But I'm also, in the last 5 or so years, have become very connected to my ancestors, and it's probably an effect of me losing religion and trying to find a new code for which to gain my to kind of base my spirituality on. Because I'm very spiritual, but I don't think Christianity and religion is a thing that matches my ideals, as at least not anymore. So now when I pray to my ancestors, I pray to my uncles, I talk to my dad like he's in the room. And I know people say this, but ever since my father passed away, things have just made sense in a way that they didn't before. So I'm convinced that he's somewhere making things work, along with all of the council of elders who he is there with. And that's who I commune with. That's who I meditate to when I pray. And you're absolutely right. I love that phrase that when you walk into a room, there's so many people who you're walking in with. And every day I pray that they are honored by the work that I do. I think a part of the reason why I don't understand fully why I'm so committed to libraries comes from the fact that maybe it's just the legacy that I'm not supposed to have. I'm just here playing my role. My grandfather was big on education. I've heard this, and I've experienced it as well. And I think maybe I'm playing my role. So I am like rooted in family. My siblings come for everything at Book Bunk, that every book event. My mother was just at our literature festival last week, and she comes with her friends, and they sit in the front with their flasks of tea and just experience the work that we do. And that for me is the biggest validation. If my family are not behind what I'm doing, then I'm probably not going to do it. Because they know my heart, and I know theirs, and there's never a season or a reason where we have had a reason to not trust each other, which I know is a privilege, because I know that families out there sometimes have had, and not always as close as we are, but I love my people deeply.
So that's your safety net.
Absolutely.
All right. So I wanted to, take you into a different space, but a space that you've mentioned in passing, as we have been having this discussion. And that is, what do you think the future is for the written word? Um, I would have thought that you'd be nervous about AI, but you tell me that you use Chat GPT all the time. And that's interesting to me, because often when we speak about creativity, the creativity industry, there's this fear that AI will take it over and render all your jobs nugatory, and the end of the world is coming for writers. The end of the world is coming for musicians, because of AI. And I was wondering, in your discussions, in the literary festivals that you have with Book Bank, what are writers, creatives thinking about the future for this field in Africa? And what part do you think you can play with this push you have for memory and restoration and healing, actually, and growing?
I was very scared about AI about a year ago. But I also remember that we were scared about Facebook and Twitter and all of these things when they first came. I remember being very, very much like, I don't want my information on Facebook. I don't, why would I put my face on a screen that everyone can see? And then we came around, and I am coming around because I have learned that I can write faster and more efficiently with AI. Of course, it will create threat to jobs of editors and designers and musicians. There's threat, but there's always been threat. Anytime we have a revolution, it is our job as human beings to innovate and find new ways to be. And it's always really scary. But I don't not do things because I'm scared of them. In fact, fear is a reason for me to do something. I'm like, what am I so scared of? Let me go figure out what's scaring me. So I would encourage anybody who's creative to figure out how they can use this tool to make more work, make it faster, make it quicker, and make it more inclusively, because I think that, because I use AI a lot, mostly, I must admit, I use it for grant writing, not so much for my creative work, because I haven't been doing much of that recently, which breaks my heart, and I have to fix that. But when I do begin to write my next work again, or when I pick it up again, I would hope that it would make my research faster, because I'm rooted in research. The journalist in me requires that I know facts so I can play around with them and turn them into fiction. And that will be made faster. I won't need to spend 9 months. I can maybe spend 3. Um, I think AI is doing incredible things to connect people across interests that are so small and so they're very small and not so much mainstream, but are still interests of our people. And then we can find each other using some of these platforms. But we've always got to, we're at a moment where we have to figure out how to be better. And that's, no one ever loses, but that's the thing that we're being triggered to do to do. I think there are massive gaps in the information being fed into this machine learning systems, and that also biases Africans. So there's so many times when I'm just like, that is wrong, that is not true about my country or whatever, and had to correct it. There's challenges, but I think there's definitely a lot more opportunities. I'm finding that it's making me a lot more efficient. But I'm not then hiring less people because I'm using AI. I am finding more ways to create livelihoods. I feel very responsible about building livelihoods where I can. So we've got to just be a little more imaginative in the way that we can use it, and I think it'll make us work a lot faster.
I wanted to, in coming to a close on this interview, to ask you about what I think is the Chimamanda effect. Um, this emancipation of women writers, this proliferation of African women writers. I was quite struck when I went to Textbook Center the other day, and the whole place is a swarm, with books written by African women. And I'm wondering, in your discussion with your colleagues across the continent, how that presence of the African woman voice is changing our understandings of our society and changing our understandings about literature. Is the impact being felt? And what's one key thing that's changed?
Oh my gosh, I love this question because I was discussing it last night with a bookseller who literally said that she has run her bookstore for the last 7 or so years, and just the sheer volume of books by Africans now coming onto her shelf it's so encouraging. And I love that you call it the Chimamanda effect. I think it actually is the Chimamanda effect. I began to write because of reading Half of a Yellow Sun. I've always known I wanted to write, but Half of a Yellow Sun got me at my desk typing because I just could not believe the way that book made me feel. And that's true for so many other writers. I think that silent power we were talking about earlier is gonna be what these books do, because we're suddenly telling stories that have been not prioritized, that have been kind of relegated as other, and in this silent, subtle way, in our juicy, eloquent fiction, we're suddenly beginning to talk about these things. And it's a serious things like elections, but also just like love stories. Love stories are so revolutionary because they're about pure joy and connection and all of the things that we're all looking and striving towards. So I love, I'm gonna start calling it the Chimamanda effect as well. And I think that what it's doing is being able to give room to so many other kinds of stories by men and women as well, by women and men as well. And that's why I'm like, we need AI to work faster so we can get them out there faster, get them edited and copied faster, so we can just begin to creep up on the patriarchy from our fiction, from our work, from our libraries, and then we can get to see some change. But I can't wait to start writing again, because I think that that's where my power is most seen, is most palpable.
Okay, so as we close, I want to ask you what your power mantra is. Um, you've been exercising power um, in in many ways, whether as an events manager, whether as a writer, whether as the CEO of this, the co-founder of this extraordinary NGO called Book Bunk. What would you say about leadership and power? What does it mean to you?
I think leadership is about listening, and hearing what's being said and what's not being said. And I have so many answers for this question. I'm gonna try and give you one. But leadership and power for me is about paying attention and listening. The mantra that I'm coming to a lot more now is not to waste a crisis. And I think in my life that's been true. The crisis of my father's passing led me to my writing. The crisis of coming back home and not knowing, okay, I've come back home, I've been in SA for all of these years, I've been writing this book. Am I gonna get it published, or am I gonna do something else? That really steered me back to my love and passion for libraries. And recently, the crisis of the current financial landscape has forced us to really look at this organization and be like, how can we make sure we're here for as long as the Macmillan has been here? 94 years it's been standing there. So how can we build Book Bunk to last? So I think when everything feels like it's going downhill, that's a good excuse to regenerate, to refocus, to try and do everything, because you have a good excuse. You can blame the powers that be. So don't waste a good crisis, because it's giving you a moment to pause and an excuse to pause. And I think for someone like me who's always doing too much, I take them now. I'm just like, oh great, we can change course and we can re-strategize. So that would be my mantra. Don't waste a crisis.
Don't waste a crisis. Interesting. Thank you very much for that wisdom. We thank Wanjiru Koinange for this generous conversation. Her work, both as an author and a restorer of our public libraries, is making an indelible mark on our country's history and the aspirations of future generations. And to our audience, we thank you most sincerely for listening and look forward to your company on a special Power Panel Bookshelf episode on the Havoc of Choice later on this week. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss it. This is the Power Panel Podcast. Echoes.